Okay. You want to know about how many cars that I had?
Not how many. Oh, just tell me about all the different cars.
Okay.
What's your first car?
My first car was a VW Bug, a Beetle. And, well, actually, my parents had a Cougar that was the coolest car in the whole world. It was white. It had black bucket seats, a wood grain steering wheel, and it had a black vinyl, a black vinyl roof. And I think I forgot to put oil in it when the oil light came on, and it trashed the car.
Really?
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think yeah. And
You did that, huh?
I did that. Then I married a guy who also did it. But I couldn't get too mad because I had done that.
Okay, so that's your parents' car. What's your first car?
And that was my car. They gave it to me. And they gave my brother the Rambler that we had, which was a tin can piece of crap. Yeah. But he was grateful to have it. And so then I got a job on a farm. And my grandmother, we found a VW Beetle, bright blue. It was bright blue, royal blue, like the color of an IKEA bag, for $700. Wow. And so my grandma gave me $350, and I paid $350. So we split the cost of this car, and that was my car. It was an ugly, ugly color. So I tried to think of the most ugly German name I could think of. And
Klaus.
I named him Anton. Because we had a paper boy when I was little growing up. His name was Anton Steckel, and he was just yucky. And
I hope Anton doesn't see this.
Oh, Anton won't see it. So Anton went to college with me. There was a time when he wouldn't start. And so I would have to like open the car door and run with him on the street. And then jump in the car and throw it in first, and you'd pop start it that way. If you had it in first gear and your foot was on the clutch, then you pop your foot off the clutch and it catches and it starts driving.
And that worked?
Yeah, it worked. Yeah. Either that or I would try to park on an incline. But people would run out into the road in front of our house and help me push the car to start it. And this is actually a good story about Anton. So when I graduated from college in 1974, I drove home in Anton. And my friend, well, she wasn't really my friend. She was a girl that I knew in high school named Amy Schneider. She drove by. She came by my house, and my mother's house, and she said, "Carolyn, I'm getting an apartment in D.C. with
Mom, focus.
My friend Michelle. Would you? And we need another roommate. Would you like to join us? Move move to D.C. with us in a really cool apartment?" I said, "Yeah, I'll do it. I'll do it." And so I lived there for 2 years. And at one point, I had a really good friend, Michael Carmack, who lived down around the corner from me. And he was a bartender in the restaurant where I worked, the pizza place.
What's the name of that place?
Alban Towers.
Does it still exist?
Oh, yeah, it's absolutely gorgeous. It's at the intersection of Massachusetts Avenue and Wisconsin Avenue, right up the hill from Georgetown. It was the most perfect place to live. And we sublet this apartment from people.
The apartment was called that. What was the restaurant called?
Oh, I don't even know the name of it.
Okay.
All
right, Alban Towers is where you lived. Okay.
Yeah. And the other people who lived in Alban Towers were students, international students, foreign students from George Washington University. They kind of had a contract with Alban Towers to have this kind of be the dormitory for the foreign kids. And so there were all these gorgeous men hanging out in the lobby and in the restaurant in this place where I lived. There was a front desk, and there were house phones that went up to each house, each room. And it was unbelievable. Most of the guys were gay. I don't know, for some reason. Like my friend Michael Carmack was gay. And he called me Ducky. and he'd come over and tuck me in and stuff. And he'd say, "Do you want to kiss goodnight?" And I'd say, "Yes, yes." I'd be in bed, and he would like kiss me. "Good night, Ducky." And I'd say, "Good night, Michael."
So weird. Okay.
And so so at one point I was going away for I was going somewhere for like a weekend, and Michael asked if he could borrow my car. So Anton was available. Next to Alban Towers was a vacant lot that was probably worth $1 million even back then. Empty, dirt. It was just dirt. And there was a Fiat convertible parked there. And so Michael borrowed my car, and he went down to Georgetown, which was definitely downhill. And when he was coming home, the brakes gave out on Anton, and he limped it to the parking lot, to the big empty lot next to Alban Towers, and parked it there next to the Fiat. At this point, the Fiat was getting stripped of everything on it, and in the back of my car, I didn't know it, there was a set of watercolor paints and maybe a blanket. I don't know what else, but there were about 2 or 3 things in the back of Anton. And by the time I came home and found out that the brakes were gone, I went out to look at him, and he was fine, but the Fiat was getting stripped. They had cut open, like it was a convertible. They had sliced the roof, and they had taken the bumper, and they started taking the outside part of this car, and
But Anton was okay.
Anton was okay. So for 6 months, Anton stayed parked because I didn't know what to do. I couldn't drive it anywhere. I didn't know exactly what to do. My father finally, after about 6 months, he said, "Carolyn, we have to do something about that car. It can't be sitting there for another 6 months. It's going to wind up being stripped, just like." So my father came, and he knew a guy way out in Darnestown, out in the suburbs, way out in the country, that had a gas station and a repair place and a tow truck. And my father had towing on his insurance. So he and I went out there, and everything was still in the back of Anton. Anton had not been touched. The Fiat was stripped. It was now, the tires were gone. It was on in cinder blocks. It was sitting on cinder blocks. The tires were gone. The hubcaps were gone. Anton was perfect. Nobody wanted Anton's body parts. And my father said, "I can't believe it. I can't believe it." He was so excited that nobody had messed with Anton and left my paints and my blanket in there. So the tow truck comes, and it hooks up Anton, and it tows Anton out to Darnestown. So then when I called them to see if they had done fixing him, and I at the time was living at home. I had moved back home, or maybe I wasn't at home yet, but I had gotten a job at an ice rink, and I really got into I got into hockey skates. And I wanted a pair of hockey skates, and this kid was selling these hockey skates for like $50 or something. I forget. I don't remember. So that was my thing in life. I wanted hockey skates. So I go out there in my mother's car. I drive out to Darnestown, and I ask the guy how much I owe him. He goes, "Well, it's $100 because I fixed the brakes." And I said, "Okay, how much is this car worth?" He said, "About 150. I said, "Well, what will you give me for it? Do you want it? Would you buy it from me?" He goes, "Yeah, I would give you $135. And I said, "Okay, I'll take it." He said, "I just told you that the car is worth $150. That's $15 less. I'll pay $15 less than what I just told you what it's worth. You can get more." And I said, "I don't want more." So I owed him $100, and so he gave me
$35.
he gave me $35, and I think I owed my mother $20 or something. So I wound up with $15, and I drove straight to the ice rink, and I had $15, and I said to that kid, "Here it is. Here's what I have. I'll give you $15 down if you give me the skates, and tomorrow, next paycheck, I'll give you the rest of it." He was charging me
So you essentially traded
a
a
car
Volkswagen for
for a pair of ice skates, and I think I still have them. They're downstairs in the basement.
I can wear them.
That was ridiculous because the next car I got, I did this essentially the same thing with my Honda. I had I had the Cougar, and I knew that there was something wrong with the transmission because of the fluid that I forgot to put in there, and I went out to this is a really good story about how I get if you try to pull one over on me and my father, our dynamic. So I went to the Datsun place. It was way over on the other side of the Beltway, and this guy introduced himself to me. He said, "My name is Doug Dan, and I'll buy your car for $200. And I was like, "Okay, all right, but don't you want to drive it?" And he said, "No, And I wanted one of those little Datsun 210s, the Honeybee. It had a Honeybee logo on it, and it was a used car. And I would only have given him, like, I don't know, a little bit more than 200. It wasn't very much money. And so my dad came with me, and we go into the showroom, and he hands me a contract, and he asked me to sign it. I didn't sign it. And he came outside, and he said,
"Fuck." Oh, it's still rolling.
He said, "I have my manager here, and he wants to ride in the car before we close this deal." And I said, "Well, you already told me you didn't want to drive it." And he said, "Well, I have to drive it before we can close this deal." And I said, "Okay, here's the keys." He took it out. He brought it back. He said, "I can't give you $200. I said, "You already said that you would pay me $200 for that car." And he said, "Well, my manager, no, we don't accept cars that have problems." And I said, "Well, you didn't even want to drive it." I said, "Why did you quote that number for me?" I said, "Forget it. I'm finished with you. I wouldn't buy a car from you now if you paid me." My father's like, Carolyn, stop it." I said, "In fact, come on, Dad." And I go into the showroom, and I said, "Everybody, you need to know that this guy, Doug Dan, is a crook.
He has two first names.
He's a liar. We shook." He said, he called himself Daddy Dan. "We made a deal. He made me an offer on my car. Here's the contract." And I ripped it up and I threw it on the ground.
Omi.
And my father's going, Carolyn, get in the car and be quiet." And I said, no. I want everyone to know that this man is a sleazeball. And I said, and you know what we did? We shook on it. And he didn't even drive my car. And now he's not paying me what he said he would pay me. And I said, we shook hands on it. He said, "Daddy Dan, just call me Daddy Dan. Daddy Dan is a crook." And my father's like, "Carolyn, stop. Just stop."
Confrontation.
I can't do this. I can't stand this. And I said, "Get in the car, Dad." And I said, "Give me my keys to my car." And so I guess I drove the Cougar home, and he drove his car. And I said, I'm going to the Honda place in Bethesda." So we drove to Bethesda.
Careful, Daddy. There's a mosquito right there. It was on my knee.
And I had this real young guy as a salesman. His name was Michael, I think. And
Nothing like Daddy Dan.
nothing like Daddy Dan. And I said, "I just got screwed over at the Datsun place over in Clinton, or I forget where it was." And he said, "Oh, well, maybe I could interest you in a Honda Civic." So there was this bright yellow Honda Civic. It was this color. It was like a school bus. And so I drove it and I loved it. It was $3,000 exactly. And which was not a lot of money for a car.
New?
New, yeah. And I said to this kid, "You know why I'm buying this car? Because you're not like Doug Dan." And he said, "Well, I'm new at this. I'm learning how to do this." And I said, "Well, I appreciate that you seem honest."
What was his name?
Michael.
Oh.
And when I took the car back for a 50, whatever, that first checkup, like a 1,000 miles, 1,000-mile checkup, I said, "Where's Michael? I'd like to deal with Michael." They said, "Oh, Michael, he was terrible at selling cars." I said, "I liked him a lot, and that's why I bought this car, because of him. You fired him? Oh, that's too bad, because he was a really nice person." And
It just shows you that you can't make it as a nice person selling cars, I guess.
you can't.
Was the
An
color
honest
of your
person.
car the color of a taxi?
The color of a what?
A taxi,
Yes, like a taxi. Yes,
but without the black.
without the
Yes.
without the light. Yeah. And Betsy and I drove that car to Colorado that summer. It was a great little car. But after a while, there was something wrong with the transmission, and nobody around here worked on foreign cars. Nobody would fix my car. At one point, oh my God, here's
Nobody
a story.
worked on foreign cars.
Yeah, they wouldn't.
Wow.
So I took it down to its place on Virginia Avenue in Cumberland. And the guy called me up and he goes, "Ma'am, here's the thing. We can't fix a Honda, brand car. But I took out your transmission and it needs to go up to Windber, Pennsylvania, to the Honda dealership." And I said, "Well, I don't have a car. I was living up in Garrett County in the National Hotel. I didn't have another car." I said, "Well, how is my transmission going to get up there if I can't take it? I don't have a vehicle." And he goes, "Don't you worry. I'll buy it a bus ticket. And so I am going to put your transmission on a Greyhound bus." I said, "You're buying it?" He goes, "Yeah, you have to pay for the ticket, but I'm going to get the ticket and send the transmission to Windber."
That sounds hilarious.
And so
It sounds like a children's book. Like, "I'm going to buy your transmission, a ticket on the bus." And it's like, it gets on the bus.
I know. I
That
know.
little suitcase.
I know. And so two days later, I called the Windber Honda dealership, and I said, "My name is Carolyn Collin, and my mechanic sent my transmission up to you a couple days ago. It should have gotten there yesterday." And they says, "Ma'am, we don't have a transmission from Cumberland here." I said, "What do you mean you don't have my transmission?" They said, "We don't have it. We'd get a call from the bus station if there's a part or something down here that needs to be picked up, and we haven't gotten that call." And I started crying. I was at school. And so I called the guy on Virginia Avenue, and he said, you ruined your transmission, ma'am, because you ride the clutch." I said, "I don't ride the clutch. I know how to drive a stick shift. I do not ride the clutch. I did not destroy my transmission." He said, "Well, I don't know how it got ruined." So I called the Greyhound place, and I'm crying, and I said, I told the lady at the Greyhound place my story, how this guy supposedly put my transmission. She goes, "Well, what happens is we get things that are like, objects and appliances and things here. Was it in a burlap bag?" And I said, "I have no idea, but I will call him and ask him what it was in." So I called him, and he goes, "Yes, ma'am, it was in a brown burlap bag." She said, "Well, honey, what happens is I saw it." She said, "I saw your honey, I saw your transmission on the loading dock. So what happened is it probably got picked up, and we're right on Route 70. Route 70 goes right into Pittsburgh, and so what happened is your transmission probably went all the way into Pittsburgh, and now we have to wait for it to come back out to Windber, which is, in the east of Pittsburgh. And so she said, "Listen, honey, I'll call you as soon as I find it. I will meet the next buses that come through here, and I will find it and I will call you." So she called me. She said, "It's here, honey. It's here. It's here. I found it." So I called the guy in Cumberland then, and I said, "Okay, it's there." And they checked it, and they said, "This didn't happen from riding a clutch. You had a gasket leakage, oil gasket leaking onto your transmission. That's what ruined your transmission."
You're like, I knew it.
Yeah, I said, thank you. Tell the guy in Cumberland." So now I called him. I said, "Okay, so now it's fixed. How do I get my transmission back?" And he's like, "Well, ma'am, my wife goes to Windber to go Christmas shopping. She's going tomorrow morning. I will have her stop there and pick up your transmission, and she'll bring it back and I'll call you as soon as it gets here." So that's what happened.
So, wife goes, picks up the transmission
Yeah.
in the burlap sack.
Yeah,
Brings it back to him.
Yeah,
He
and
puts
then
it back
he
in
puts
your
it
car?
back in my car, and I got a ride down there, picked it up, and
It lasted for another 100,000 miles.
not even 100,000 miles. I'm driving the car in downtown. It was probably a year later, not even a year. I'm driving the car in downtown Oakland, and the transmission actually dropped out of my car. I mean, I'm going like 20 miles an hour on 219.
Don't you think that means they just didn't put it back in right?
I don't know what happened.
But that was the end of it.
Yeah, that was the end of it. It just boom. I mean, my head did hit the windshield, but not hard.
That's the end of the school bus colored Honda Civic.
Yeah. And so I had it towed by this guy up in West Salisbury, a guy named Holiday. He was the only guy that would work on that Honda, and so he hauled it up to up there, and it sat there and sat there and sat there, and finally one day I stopped in and I said, "Have you looked at my car?" He said, "Yeah, it's going to be kind of an expensive fix." I said, "Never mind. Do you want this car?"
There's a lot of idiots out today.
Yeah. So he kept the car, and he said he would not charge me for what he did, which was look at it. And so I didn't make a penny off this car. It sat there and sat there and sat there. And
It's probably still there.
I look sometimes when I go by there, and I've never seen it.
Well, yeah.
So I have really bad car karma. That's the story of my cars.